Hello. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to St. Mark's this evening. Welcome to our concert, Dominion of Light. My name is Giacomo DiGrigoli. I am the executive director of the International Orange Chorale of San Francisco. And I am absolutely thrilled to see so many familiar faces here tonight. Thank you for coming for the pre-concert talk this evening with our composer, Tarik O'Regan. Tonight's program invites us to sit with something tender and complicated, estrangement. Its grief, its ambiguity, and the resilience that so many carry. We know that this topic can feel a little heavy, and we want you to feel supported. So in your program, you'll find resources listed, a lot of the organizations that helped us put this piece together, including our friends from Together Estranged, who really helped us put together the survey that collected all of the testimonies that you'll hear turned into the piece tonight. And there's other organizations offering community, healing, and care. And if that is something that you're feeling this evening, reach out to those communities. We're here. Stick around after the concert as well. We'd love to talk to you about your thoughts on the concert as well. It is now my pleasure to introduce you the artistic voice at the heart of this evening. Composer Tarik O'Regan has spent 2 years engaging deeply with the stories and the emotions that inspired tonight's piece, Dominion of Light. And before we perform it, we're honored to welcome him for a brief conversation about the work and its journey. So please join me in welcoming Tarik O'Regan.
Thanks so much. Of course. All right, yeah. Good evening.
So before we start, maybe a little brief intro for you all. We at IOCSF first became aware of Tarik through an interview we had with Jerry Blackstone, Dr. Jerry Blackstone of the University of Michigan, who recorded Tarik's piece, Mass Observation. If you don't know that piece, check it out. It's an extraordinary piece. We connected with Tarik during the pandemic through IOC's podcast at the time called In Unison. And we reached out to Tarik and we had a lovely chat. And we were inspired to start rehearsing one of his pieces called I Listened to the Stillness of You while we were meeting remotely in the spring of 2021. And so, of course, when Zain Fiala, our previous artistic director, was thinking about, for a new commission exploring this theme, Tarik rose to the top kind of immediately. So, Tarik, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for welcoming me here. It's a great honor. Nice to be here. Thank you.
So, let's talk about the origin of this collaboration. This is a pretty heavy topic. What were your first thoughts when we reached out about a piece centered on estrangement?
I mean, I think the first thing I want to say is a bit of background in how it works being a composer. When you start off writing music, people come to you with all kinds of ideas. Might you write a piece for my cat? Well, yes, I'll write a piece for your cat. And then slowly your career develops, and at some point, someone says, might you write a piece for my cat? And you say, I'm sure the cat is very meaningful for you, but I have, various other things to get on with. All to say, without being sort of egotistical about it, at some point it's fairly rare to have a commissioner come with a very specific idea that resonates. That doesn't happen. It really doesn't happen. You might, if you're following what's going on at the Metropolitan Opera, you might see that that's how Peter Gelb is trying to run the Metropolitan Opera, which is, I have an idea for what opera should be. I'm going to go and look for some composers, some great composers, and I'm going to give them the idea and see if it resonates. So the first thing I want to say is, on the whole, a commissioner coming with an idea is not a common one. And for an idea to resonate is exceptionally rare. So the stars aligning up there for this evening is really quite something. And I think this idea of estrangement immediately struck me, I think partly because of our connection during the pandemic. And I had a very broad range of estrangement because I think everyone was thinking about it. Everyone was thinking about not being connected, whether willingly or not willingly. And then as we began talking more about it and the specifics of estrangement and the organizations that we partnered with and the personal stories involved, this connection between individual estrangement, for example, within families, within small social groups, and its connection to broader estrangement really, I think, connected with me as a relatively recent arrival in San Francisco. I moved here in 2019, and I think we were doing the podcast
2020?
2020. Yeah. And so I'd lived in New York prior to that, and moving here, there seemed to be an ongoing discourse about, for want of a better word, people that seemed estranged from their city, and why that was happening. And it was very complicated. I couldn't get my head around it. And then you came with this project, but from a very extremely personal angle. This was about the individual, it was about the family. And so in my mind, immediately I thought, well, there's some resonance between the individual and this broader societal connection. And it was something I just really wanted to do. So thank you.
We're glad you did. And as we mentioned earlier, a lot of the texts in the piece are actually drawn from community stories that were sourced from folks here tonight and further abroad. How did you start to think about merging raw personal accounts into a cohesive, poetic, and musical structure?
I think I remember when you sent me the results of your confidential and anonymized survey in a database, for want of a better word, of testimony. And I remember receiving it, and there was a sort of very visceral reaction to it, which is, I think, we're drawn possibly to the most harrowing or strongest testimony. And I remember receiving it thinking, I'm going to need some time to sit with this and look at it. And as as someone that, I wouldn't say I'm completely outside of this, but, I'm very aware that I don't want to speak on behalf of individual cases, and particularly people that brought this to us. As I sat with it, I think there was this sort of curious poetry that began to come to my mind, whereby estrangement is a curious thing. I don't think it's a monolithic sensibility. And what came out, I think, was this sense of varieties of contact. You might think, I am in touch with my family, or I am not in touch with my family. The majority of the testimony was not that. It was a great variety of forms of contact. And the word contact kept coming up. Partial contact, total no contact, occasional contact, intermittent contact, frequent contact, non-frequent contact, random contact. And this sort of tick, 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 contact, contact, contact kept coming into my head. But it spoke to something broader, which is, I think, it's easier for us to think of things monolithically, either on or off, yes or no. I mean, think of the political world we live in today. The gray area in between is the harder place to inhabit. And I think this idea of something that was clearly, I think, spoke of trauma and stress in a lot of the testimony. Also, there was a curious sense of stasis that I found very poetically appealing, which is how do you look at something that on the surface is either on or off, but in reality is not that from the testimony that I was receiving. So I think that immediate push of narrative was very appealing. And just honestly, the word contact and the fact that it came up so many times in very different forms was very powerful to me, you know. And from my own family, you know, I think people are possibly in touch with this in a range of ways. In my immediate family, that, you know, isn't my case. But for example, if I think of my father, this is someone that was you know, for the bulk of his life estranged from his father. Yet I had a very strong relationship with my grandfather. So right there you have a paradox. How can a generation be jumped through this idea of contact? What does that mean? So I think the paradox of it is really what appealed. I like the gray areas of the world.
Speaking of the gray areas, one of the things that we asked in our survey of the folks who were responding was, are there works of art, or are there anything that inspires you, or what do you think about when you think of the term of estrangement, especially if you're feeling it for yourself? Where do you go for solace, or what works of art out there might sound to you or feel like what you're experiencing? And one that came up, which references the title of our piece, is The Dominion of Light, the pieces by Magritte, the series of paintings by Magritte that are those surrealist photos that look like night in the foreground and day in the dark, that ambiguity. Can you tell us a little bit about how some of those works of art, and in fact some of the pieces that you also refer to in your piece, kind of came together with those testimonies, and how that imagery of dark and light play out within the piece?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's very curious what people refer to in the artistic world. I was struck by how many people who responded to this survey were in complicated situations but reached out to concrete works of art to express what they were feeling. And so someone reaching out to the Magritte painting saying, I don't have the words exactly, but this is the painting that I feel. And you look at the painting, and of course it's two things at once. It's night and day concurrently, depending on whether you're looking inside the house or outside the house, but we know that it's not possible for that to exist. Yet, of course, in the person that's referencing the painting, it exists very strongly in their heart. And I think the idea of referencing art became, or artistic forms was interesting because several people talked about, you know, various other artistic words and would reference poems or whatever. And so I think in the libretto, something that comes up is you'll hear the phrase, there is this poem floating around. And one of the respondents referenced a poem that meant something to them, but the poem that I started hearing was this refrain about contact, no contact, low contact, cordial contact, contact, total, no contact. And that became my poem. And I thought, well, if people are referencing artwork, there are probably things that in my life I've thought of with regard to this topic. So Emily Dickinson, who I've always been drawn to throughout my life, has this poem that begin, or segment of the poem that begins the work about parting, being all we know of heaven and all we need of hell. And again, it's this sort of, what does that exactly mean? It's not a settled sentiment. And I think this sense of unsettledness is important to me at the beginning. And I think the other part of it, with the Walt Whitman poem that ends the text, is there isn't a sense of resolution necessarily in the testimonies that were given, but there is a sense of light that may cast some brightness on this stasis. And the Walt Whitman poetry essentially is about, I think, focusing on oneself and ridding oneself of a sense of resolution as a concrete answer. And this idea of, I celebrate myself and I sing myself, and what I do assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I find very powerful in terms of mindfulness and self-determination and a way to move forward, if not to answer. And I think that's what I bring to the piece. That's my perspective on it.
You've given us a few different clues and things to listen to tonight.
Sure.
Talking about the text, the contact, no contact, these things. Folks can obviously see a slew of percussion instruments behind us.
Yes.
You've got a choir who's going to be joining us. As we prepare to listen to your piece for the first time together, is there anything else you'd invite the audience to listen for tonight?
Yeah, so the work is about 20 minutes, is it? Yeah, it's about 20 minutes long. It's more or less an arc. Funnily enough, the thing I would listen for is the percussion is not used very percussively. It's not bashing things all the way through. It's there to add a bit of color here and there. Funnily enough, the choir is used more percussively than anything else. And I think I would listen or try and hear the structure, that there are these slow moments of recollection and inward-looking music, which begins the piece, is in the middle of the piece, and there's this sort of perpetual motion motif that you begin hearing around the words contact, no contact. This idea of non-resolution that drives two sections around the middle, and then that begins to shift harmonically at the very end into this, as I say, a sort of a sense of light that doesn't necessarily offer resolution, but might offer a way forward. And I think if you think about that structure of the piece, it's more or less the structure I felt when I wrote the piece, which is looking inwardly, this interest in this almost found poetry from the respondents, and then thinking again, what does this mean, and then being drawn back to it, and thinking, is there such a thing as a resolution from estrangement? Should I even be thinking of that? Maybe not, maybe there is, but I'm going to move the light a little bit at the end, and I think that's what I would say to listen out for.
Well, Tarik, it has been a journey of a couple of years of
It has.
Getting this piece together, and I wanted to say on behalf of IOCSF, we are incredibly grateful for the piece you've put together for us tonight, and we are thrilled and excited to give it its premiere. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you for sharing everything you've shared with us about this piece.
Thank you so much, Giacomo. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you.
It's really great.